I would like you to come to our episode on UpDesh. Today we are discussing about building global teams for bootstrapped US startups. And I would start this episode by asking you to introduce yourself a bit.
Anusha, thank you so much for having me. Neil Bandar. I live in Philadelphia. I work for a company called Generac. I'm the Vice President of Data and Analytics.
Really wonderful to hear that. Where India was considered at a point of time as a back office for the world. You see all sitcoms and everywhere you are referred to as call center people.
Yep.
Any kind of IT help, you go to India, your calls are routed to India by default. And
Indeed.
that perception is changing. And it's so fresh to see that, it's being recognized beyond just a call center setup. And you're recognizing the skills an Indian brings to the table.
Absolutely. Today, if you look at and I don't even want to talk about the startup world because that's a whole different ball of wax. But if you talk about larger companies, there is a long list of C-suite executives that have an Indian origin.
True.
Right? They've either been the generation that immigrated to the US or a second generation that have sort of were born to a previous generation of Indian parents that came sometime in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And that list is very, very long, and it's not just limited to the technology sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one more, there is a big reservation and a myth about that, the Indians, it's a stereotype of sorts that Indians are good with math and they are good with technology. They are good with the tech stuff only. I think somewhere that perception is also shifting. So why do you think that perception is shifting? Is it because the first generation has done the groundwork of the Indian diaspora, or is it because of the talent crunch around the world? People are looking at more expanding beyond geographies, and because of the pandemic, people have explored different regions where they have tried outsourcing, offshoring to different locations, be it nearshoring or going beyond that. So what is the reason that gradually this has shifted completely?
Yeah, I wish I knew what that silver bullet was, Anvisha, to be honest. But I think it's a number of different factors, some of which you've already highlighted. One is the talent crunch in the US. The Indian community is by far one of the youngest communities around the world. I think outside of Africa, if you look at the age distribution of talent, you'll find a very significant number of Indians are much younger compared to anywhere else in the world. Japan's aging, Europe's aging. Our birth rate in the US is on a very significant decline. So there's obviously younger talent that's available. We've also benefited from a legacy where we have a very large proportion of English-speaking people. Right? Even the opportunity when you go back in time to the old BPO days, the call center, the back office function, our biggest advantage was, one, we had reasonably good infrastructure to have connectivity from the US, from any other part of the world, combined with the fact that you had people that could speak English, right? You couldn't put those BPOs up in Latin America. You couldn't put those BPOs up in Central Europe, partly because English was not necessarily an official language, right? So there's a number of those sorts of things. And plus, I think at some level, there is a deep-rooted competitiveness in most Indians, because you grow up in a society where there's a billion people competing for a very narrow pool of resources. So people are hardworking, and of those hardworking people, if you're lucky enough to have the right kind of opportunities and had the right kind of exposure, it gives you that much of an advantage to sort of leapfrog. And so as a result, many of those things have come together from a timing, from an opportunity perspective. And you cannot avoid the fact that over a period of time, there has been a groundswell of a lot of visible talent, and that's created more of a openness to reframing Indian talent outside of pure technology, pure math, right? So you start seeing once the glass ceiling is broken, right, then it becomes easier for the next and the next and the next individual to sort of say, hey, you know what? I can do more than math. I can do more than technology.
True,
So it's
true.
a number of these forces sort of coming together to help the generation that is and the generation that is to come with many, many more opportunities. I mean, I would never have expected that there would be a British Prime Minister with an Indian origin. I
True.
would never have expected that we would, as far back as about 15, maybe about 20 years at this point, we had Babu Jindal run for the US presidency. I mean,
Mhm.
to most people, that would not have been something they would have ever expected to happen. I mean, you have a Canadian parliament where a very significant portion, and I hate to quote a number because I'm not 100% sure, very significant portion of the parliamentarians have Indian origin. And that is a monumental shift in not just the perception that exists, but also what Indians are able to deliver.
Indians already existing in the system. So there are
Yeah,
NRIs who
yeah,
have risen to the position of influencing.
yes.
So it is, so they are into team building activities. So due to this familiarity, is it easier for an NRI to build a team in India, or is there is some kind of reservation there? Does it help or it does not?
Right? Just as much as you would expect a Caucasian and a Latin American to have a bias for somebody that looks, sounds, and feels similar to them, the same is true for Indians as well. They would prefer somebody who's an Indian as opposed to somebody who's not. Again, I'm making this as a very broad statement, but it's just a natural level of comfort that comes from our human evolution, where you're comfortable with the settings that you grew up with and things that you've seen and spoken and heard.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to that extent, there is always that opportunity where somebody who's in a leadership role with an Indian origin may potentially have, whether they're conscious or unconscious, a soft spot for putting something up in India that will help quickly ramp up talent. The second is it also makes it easier based on your own biases and your background to weed out when somebody is bluffing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have a, I have a deep rooted analytics background. So when people speak about analytics, it doesn't take me very long to figure out when somebody knows their stuff or somebody is just speaking their stuff, right?
True.
So I think to that extent, when I'm evaluating Indian talent, I am a little bit more critical about it. And part of
Mm-hmm.
it is not because I intend to be, but because I know how to evaluate,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Better judge
And
because I'm
so,
from that pool.
yeah, of course, yeah.
Mm.
And so as a result of it, it works both ways in the sense that it's easy for me to know, okay, if somebody is really good and really talented and capable, it's easier for me to put my trust and faith into that individual,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they are also of an Indian origin, because I know their pedigree, I know the schools they went to, I may even know the people they know. I can seek out for feedback about them and get some background evaluation done. So it works both ways. I think where I'm going with this is the answer to your question is considering Indian talent is easy, evaluating Indian talent is easy, but does that create a necessary bias? It depends because um, from my perspective, I would probably say I am more critical. So the spread that I see on the Indian talent is much broader than if I'm evaluating some other talent.
In light of what the Indian diaspora is doing, like you said, you also have a couple of people in your team. So, how is it beneficial for the Indian diaspora startups or bootstrapped uh,
Mm.
US startups to hire
Mhm.
from the Indian market? Is there an advantage? Does it help? Because these startups are a very small company, so you
Yeah,
are understaffed at times because there are
yeah,
multiple job boards that you have. And
yeah,
the thing with Indians are we love a good offer and we would wholeheartedly apply to it. So, and because we have the mass, we have the
yeah,
population for it, so there are tons
yeah.
of applications that would come in.
Yeah, so the best way I can answer your question is, I think it's easier because you can leverage your informal networks,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not always dependent on, your traditional recruiting channels, posting a job, finding people, evaluating, and going through the process. You can always reach out to that broad network. Like you said, there's a large enough mass that you can go after. Uh, but some of it is also, and I don't want to pivot from your core question, but some of it is also to raise funding. I mean, a lot of the startups will reach out within their network where they will have common linkages with, their alma maters or someone they've worked with in the past. And so, if you just think about your degrees of connections across industry, just the scale and size of the community helps in so many different ways beyond just the ability to recruit. You
Mm-hmm.
may end up starting a conversation on a recruiting front, but end up in a situation where you find somebody who's now interested in making, that seed round investment, or helping you push through in a bridge round, or helping you push through in one of the series A, B, C's as you move along. So I think there's a little bit of a flywheel effect to it, if I might say, where it's not just about hiring talent and scaling up, but it's also, finding an advisor, getting funded, all of those things, building a pipeline of potential new customers. So making those informal connections through the community can certainly come in handy.
True, true, true. So if there is help available out there, why not go
Indeed,
ahead and rope that in? Um,
absolutely.
so, have you faced any challenges when you have tried recruiting yourself? When you were looking to hire somebody, and how did you overcome them? Is there a way around it? Did you sought for help? Did you look for other staffing agencies, or how did you go around it?
Yeah, so the good and the bad part about folks that have lived in this country for 30, 40 years at this point is, our connection has sort of become a little bit of a loose, tight sort of a connection. I have a tighter, stronger network in the US, but a weaker, more dispersed network in India.
Mm-hmm.
So hiring, finding talent, um, although there is a large population, uh, being able to evaluate them is harder, right? So I can always very quickly generate a list of 5, 7, 10 people that might be good candidates to do task A, task B, task C.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know how good they are and how much oversight they are going to need, how much support are they going to need, um, how long can I expect them to stay with the organization? Because
Oh.
there's also, I've had situations where there are mass exits. Like
Mm-hmm.
one guy leaves, and all of a sudden, along with him, 20 people have left. So those sorts of scenarios are hard to tell. So we, in a couple of my prior roles, we have actually either leveraged the the existing employee network to say, hey, who else do you know that you can basically convince to bring along, instead of leveraging my personal professional network. Or in another case, we worked with agencies. There was one we used recently, and I'm not going to name names here, but they were helping us build an organization the size of about 2,400 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the recruiting community in India, beyond, and I don't mean just a platform like a Naukri.com or some of the others that exist out there, they do have a level of sophistication. And today, at the senior most levels in India, you have people like Corn Ferry, Egon Zander, Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stewart. I mean, they are making a huge amount of investment in India beyond just, placing executive talent. They're investing in org development, org strategies, and stuff like that. I did at one point in my life explore the possibility of moving back to India, and
Mm-hmm.
I worked with one of these agencies for an executive level opportunity.
Yeah, that's also something which is a conversation that is, that's existing. NRIs or the Indian diaspora coming back to India and
Right.
starting. So there is a lot of conversation around it as well.
Yeah. India is a very fertile ground right now. I was looking at some startup statistics, and 3 markets across the globe, actually 4, are thriving when it comes to startups: India, China, Israel, and the US. I mean, if you take those 4, you probably get a good 70-80% of all startups that are unicorns and very promising from a growth perspective and have a large enough revenue base in India.
Yeah, so there are numbers to back it up completely.
Indeed.
What are the 3 factors you consider are most important to have a successful hiring process or to have a fast-paced hiring in a startup environment?
Yeah, I'd say the first and most critical thing is having a common understanding of where the business is heading, right? And how quickly do you need to scale up? So if you know what you're going to be doing and what you can bring to the table, and having all your partners on the same page is absolutely critical. I know that's not directly related to the hiring process itself, but the moment everyone's on the same page as to what are they looking, what are they evaluating, and where do they want to take this, it makes the next step, the more executional side of it, easy, right? To me, as part of the hiring process, both for the people interviewing and the interviewers, optimism is absolutely critical. Right? I find it hard, personally speaking, to work with people that are pessimistic and cynical. Right? And I'm not to say that everyone needs to wear rosy glasses, but at the end of the day, if you bring a positive outlook to pretty much any problem, and startups are riddled with all sorts of opportunities every single day. You have to wear 10 hats through the course of an 8-hour day, possibly even 16-hour day. So having that optimism and the attitude to go with it is very critical. I'd say the third thing is, if you have the first 2, you need to have an organization and a partner that is helping you hire talent that is in lockstep. So you need to know how to make those decisions quickly and where you can extract yourself out of those decisions, because you can codify those decisions, right? So to the extent you, even for smaller organizations, I'd like to use the word institutionalized decisions, right? If you know what your criteria are and everyone's on the same page, including your partners, that process can become much easier, because in those early stage companies, cultural fit is very important, right? Ability and desire to succeed and fiercely succeed is very important. So as long as you have some of those expectations clearly codified, it makes it much, much easier to get that hiring process done, bring the right talent on board, and start adding value. Value creation for any new hire is not dependent on, I'm in this role and I'm doing this. It's about what else can I do? How wide is my peripheral vision?
If you make a healthy mix of hard skill assessment and a soft skill, so how you are putting them into positions and those situations, how are they answering those situational questions is also quite eye-opening for you. So does that make a little difference, or it isn't?
It may or may not, right? I mean, today, if you're a smart candidate, you have access to so many resources across the web. You can prepare for every answer there is out there, right? It's easy for you to give textbook answers that will give you a high evaluation, right? Which is where, when I talked about I'm more critical of Indian talent because I know how to weed out stuff that is textbookish, right? AI is not at that level of maturity because it can't figure out cultures. It can't figure out, what your baseline is. Right? There's a very interesting book by a gentleman named Joe Navarro, who's an ex-profiler from the CIA, and he talks about an incident in his book where they're speaking with this potential suspect, and after a certain amount of time, she starts getting jittery, and they start suspecting that she's definitely got something to hide. and then she asks for a short break, and they are more and more convinced that there is something fishy that she's definitely trying to avoid here. Turns out she comes back and she's relaxed, and they are like completely surprised and taken by shock as to what happened. So they asked her, what happened? Why you looked all agitated and anxious, and now you're all that just calm and sitting? And she said, well, my parking meter was running out, and so I was afraid if I didn't go out in time, I would get a parking ticket. Right? What it makes you realize is, unless you know someone's baseline, even on, and this is predominantly on the soft skills side, right? Not as much on a technical evaluation, but I don't think humans can pick up on some of those signals. Forget AI.
True.
Right? So body language as a evaluation tool takes a lot of training for anyone, including humans. And so AI is probably, I'd say multiples of generations away. Because unless you have a baseline setup for every individual, it's hard to basically decide, is there something here that needs either further evaluation, or in some cases a dark mark to say this is a problem.
True. Flagging it. Does hiring process differ in startups and larger establishments? Because larger organizations, they have, they are seasoned into this. They have their own big HR team. They have, they are spread across the world. So it's a different game altogether. So how different
100%.
is the startup? Because bootstrapped in US and a big company in US.
Significantly different, I would say, Anvesha. For starters, the big opportunity is how quickly can you hit the ground running. There aren't a lot of policies and guardrails and checks and balances that you have for yourself. So whatever you need to do on your own, and you need to start building that from the very first day. On the other hand, when you take a somewhat mature organization, there's a lot of support. I've said this in other forums as well. When an individual fails in a large organization, it is not that individual's failure. It's actually an organizational failure. Their manager must have not given them right feedback. The checks and balances did not activate in time. They didn't have the sophistication to pick up on signals. So most often when an individual fails in a large organization, it is a system failure. Whereas in a startup, when an individual fails, it's entirely their own fault. It's entirely their own fault, because it's a much leaner organization. So anything and everything you do has accountability to you. And so from a hiring process perspective as well, the level of engagement one should expect from the senior most people within the organization, right from the founder, CEO, and the executive team, needs to be very, very high. Right? So you cannot depend on an HR person to do this. I mean, most startups that I know don't even have an HR person. They would rather first have a tech person and a salesperson before they ever even think about HR. HR is probably the last. Generally, startups think about HR when they get big enough in size that they don't want legal problems. HR is not a priority. I also know startups where there is no such concept of an employee opinion survey. I mean, big organizations are all about.
They do NPS and all.
Yeah, in the startup world, at least most startups that I know of, they get their employee opinions through a Slack channel every Friday.
Candid Fridays or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that applies to the interview process as well. Decisions are faster. Questions can be somewhat free-formed, where there is no textbook behavioral question to go after. So there's a difference in the process in every which way one can imagine. And then there's also a huge difference in how rewards and compensations are evaluated and presented. I mean, if you're a bootstrapped organization, you're equity rich, cash poor.
True,
right?
true.
So the way you're going to compensate your staff is based on a future potential, not based on
On
what
what you
they
have
get
right
today,
now.
right? And there again, depending upon how big or small it is, if you're getting some founder equity into the organization, that's a whole different conversation too. So I think in general, borrowing on what Steve Jobs once said, you gotta be hungry if you want to even consider any candidacy in a startup organization. I mean, you
Hmm.
got to be willing to live like, you know, your entire existence is tied to the success of the organization you're with. I know a few people that went through multiple startups before they hit it big. Like they worked for like 3-4 different organizations back to back to back where they didn't get paid at all. Like there was a promise of a payment, but it didn't come until finally they decided it's time to move on. Then they go to the next startup, same thing happens, and in the next startup the same thing happens until they hit one where they hit it so big that all of a sudden it compensated for the 3 previous by orders of magnitude. So it's also in some sense an outlook from the candidate as much as from the startups, the founders and the executive team to make that abundantly clear that there is a huge amount of risk here, right? And so the candor in the conversation needs to be different. The process is different, like I said. The rewards are different.
Why do you think hiring right the first time, especially in the US bootstrap market, is very important? Like a small organization, why do you need to hire right?
I'll answer this with an example from one of my past roles I had. So, in the financial services industry, especially in credit cards, when you lend money to people, no matter how sophisticated you are at predicting risk, no matter how sophisticated you are at managing, credit risk exposure, what I've repeatedly found in every single portfolio was you are only as good as your acquisition criteria. And what I mean by acquisition in this case is new customers that you bring in. The same is true for talent acquisition. You cannot fix bad talent. And what I mean by bad talent here is not necessarily bad in a technical sense, but bad in a cultural fit sense. If somebody is not a cultural fit, then there is nothing you can do over time with incentives, with guardrails, with training, with specificity of project work that will ever make you successful. Now, it's all the more critical in a startup environment. I would probably say larger organization, given there's always 80-20 Pareto principle at play. You can end up living with people in that 80% that are non-productive, and the organization doesn't experience a single blip. But in a startup organization, if you have one person that is going to not pull their weight, you got a big problem. So hiring process is very, very critical in a startup. It's important in a larger organization, more mature organization, but far less than in a bootstrap org.
Because bootstrapped is much more lean model. So a handful of 10 people, everybody is taking their, you are responsible for what you are hired for. You have nobody to mentor and oversee what you're doing every single day. So your accountability needs to be way higher, I feel, somewhere.
The only thing that can happen is your smartness keeps coming down. The only thing you can do is the next person that you hire has to be smarter than you for the average to remain constant. I think, and this answer is not just limited to a startup founder or a startup executive team hiring talent. This is, in my opinion, true across the board, which is accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. That's number one. You're going to end up hiring bad talent. Be willing and committed to correcting it quickly. Right? Do not wait. When you realize at some point in time that the candidate's not a fit. It's only been 3 months since you brought them on board. it is in the interest of your startup survival to move on. Do not wait that decision. Do not let it linger. The last thing I will say is empower your team to do and make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. Don't be a bottleneck to them. I'd say those are the three things that I would tell any startup CEO that is hiring for talent. You'll make mistakes. When you realize it, correct it right away. And then secondly, if you brought on great talent, let them operate with that greatness. Don't be a pain in their butt.
Do you have any tips a bootstrap company needs to do to optimize their hiring process or attract top
Everything I
talent?
said, everything that I said, Amisha, is harder than it sounds. It's easy to sort of pass this on as one would call it gyan. When you're in that position and you know there is a release coming up, you got to deliver, and you're now thinking, oh God, if I let go of this person, then I have one less body to get work done. I have to find somebody else. It's, when you're holding somebody else's baby, when the baby starts crying, you hand it back and walk away. When it's your own baby, it's much, much harder because you are going to have to walk around, even if that's in the middle of the night.
What do you do to optimize it? Like you said, you take decisions faster or you enable your team member to do it faster.
Yeah.
So it speeds the process up.
Speaking of optimization, right? I mean, one thing that a startup founder and the executive team needs to realize is you cannot optimize around multiple things. Just pick one, maybe two things you want to optimize. Even with where our brains have evaluated so far, we are not at that speed and sophistication of making decisions quickly and sort of getting up there to optimize across multiple criteria. So the simpler you get, the easier it will be to sort of get to a decision, to an outcome that will be in your longer term best interest. Be that hiring, be that firing, be that giving someone equity, any decision that might be.
So your North Star is always the health of your startup.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you think these small companies, these small scale bootstrap companies, do innovative things to at least attract the right people? Because employer branding is a big thing. People do not know you, they will not apply to you. Even if they find out about you, there would be a big process into it. So what do you do in such?
I love this question, and especially the openness of this question. But I will tell you, there isn't a single answer. There isn't a silver bullet to this. I know a few years ago when Target decided to set up office in India. This was their back office function and their technology center and whatnot. They did something quite interesting. They sent a plush toy to the candidates' parents. You're in a culture in India where your parents are involved in your life, not just till the point in time you leave home and you fly away, but much longer until they are dead. Right? Making them feel proud of you by having them associate with something as simple, as small as, I hate to use the word trivial in this case, but as trivial as a plush toy. I think they sent everyone a dog with the bullseye on the typical Target dog.
Yeah.
And that was a huge hit for the candidates. So how do you do employer branding? How do you attract candidates? It will depend on the culture of your organization. I think in a place like India, though, it will be the branding effort does not start and end with the candidate alone. I think it extends to their larger family, their circle, their friends, their networks, partly because people take a lot of pride in the organizations they associate with. And this is true for most organizations around the globe. but more so in a place like India, where the organization you work for is your alter ego. It's an extension of your personality. So if for whatever reason there's a reputational issue with the organization, people take that personally.
Very true, very true. Thank you so much for talking to me. It was lovely speaking to you. You've answered so many of the questions from a very broader point of view and pinpoint some very beautiful points and very beautiful insights from your research. It shows. Thank you so much for speaking to me.
Anvisha, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the video.